Hello and welcome everyone to this little video. Omar and I are going to present the value survey that we did this summer. And it's basically a survey in which we were targeting video game players that play historical video games. So who are we? First, Omar is going to present himself.
So, I'm Omar Bugter. I'm an historian. I've recently graduated from Utrecht University from the Master Cultural History of Modern Europe. And from February until May, I was interning at Value. So that's why I am here. And Stefan is going to talk about himself now.
Yes, my name is Stefan Tibboel, and I'm currently still at Leiden University. I'm a master's student. And this year I did my bachelor thesis, which was also about the survey and basically Sid Meier's Civilization 6. And I wanted to know more about the public's perception of the past in video games. So more specifically, Civilization 6. And by that, I was involved with this survey. And also a part of this survey was a part of my research project. And right now I'm doing my master in heritage and museum studies. So now we're going to talk more about the actual survey, the goal of it. So the main goal basically was to identify the players that we're dealing with um, through value. So with value, we want to research video games, more specifically video games that take place in the past or that present the past. But in order to do so, we also need to know who is actually playing the video games. So we need to understand the player that is playing the video game. And therefore, our knowledge about the player is very vital for the research of value and also for other historical video game research. Unfortunately, the data that we actually have of the player is very minimal. So we know very little about the player, who it actually is, and why they actually play these video games. So, in order to gain more knowledge on the player, we set up this survey that was basically targeting players of historical video games. And there were several topics that we wanted to address in this survey. For instance, we had some questions about that were related to the player. Um, so targeting what is your gender, what type of education did you have, etc. Other questions were more about the history part of video games. So, how do you feel about historical accuracy in video games, and what is your relation with the past? But also questions about the video games themselves. So, how often do you play the video games, and what kind of genres do you prefer? In the survey, we had this structure. It consisted of 4 parts. And the first part was a bit of an introduction to the survey. So the general questions like what is your age, what is your gender, where do you live, those kind of questions. So we had a sort of basic view of the player. Then the second part was with relation to the past. And then the third were questions regarding historical accuracy in video games. And then the fourth part was actually the part that was meant for my bachelor thesis, and these went very much in depth with Sid Meier's Civilization 6. So if people also played Sid Meier's Civilization 6, they had the option to also answer questions about my survey and the questions I wanted to ask for my bachelor thesis. These results will not be presented in the survey. We are only focusing on the survey questions from the actual value survey. So on the 7th of May, we actually launched the survey, and we did that through several online platforms, mostly social media such as Facebook, Twitter, the several links Value has with their community. But the main platform we distributed the survey on was actually Reddit. And Reddit proved to be a very effective way of distributing the survey, which I will talk about more later. But first, there are some. We also included a couple of Steam card coupons in order to motivate people to actually do the survey, and this turned out to be also very effective. To the right, we see a couple of examples of people responding on the posts we made on Reddit, a bit comical ones. So using Reddit as a form of a distribution form or method turned out to be quite effective, and there wasn't, of course, there were some advantages and also one major disadvantage. And the first advantage was that it was very easily accessible compared to many other platforms. So usually you make a post on a subreddit, for instance, on the subreddit of, let's say, Age of Empires, and then your post will get will be first looked at a moderator, for instance, if it is allowed on the subreddit. And most of the subreddits we posted on, the moderators were very easy about it. They were very happy to have our posts in their subreddits. So that was really cool. There was one exception though with Battlefield, which was quite interesting. So last year we had there was this heated discussion about historical accuracy surrounding the latest release of the Battlefield genre. So there was a bit of a heated discussion going on, a bit of controversy, and the moderators of the Battlefield subreddit didn't really allow us to post our survey because they were afraid that we would sort of stir up this conversation again. So, but Battlefield was one of the few examples where we weren't allowed or we weren't able to get our survey distributed. Another great advantage of Reddit was that it was a very interactive community. So we had a lot of responses, surprisingly, 1,000 responses in one day already, which we mainly contributed to Reddit. So there was a lot of attention going around on our survey, so that was really cool, and it spread like wildfire. Everyone was suddenly responding on our survey in the first couple of days. But also a great advantage was that after the people filled in the survey, they were also able to leave a comment. So if they had any further thoughts or they had some ideas or some additional comments they wanted to add to the survey but weren't allowed to or they couldn't for some reason, they were still able to post like their ideas on the subreddit. So that was really cool. So we could really engage with the communities that were answering or responding to our survey. One of the major disadvantages of Reddit that we experienced was representation. So in the next slide, you'll see that most of our respondents are male. So we're looking at an 85% of the respondents are actually male. And this is not this is not a great representation of the actual gamer community, let's put it like that. Because according to our survey, only a small proportion of the gamers is female, which is simply not true. There is a bit of a stereotype of a gamer. I know that the gamer is a male, but this is simply not true, as we'll see in the next slide, in this figure. So Newzoo did some research in 2017, and they came up with this quite great figure, and it immediately already shows that 46% of the gamers are actually women. So this is a bit of an average across all different age groups and all different countries, but this is sort of the average we're looking at. And 46% doesn't really compare to the 85% male that we experienced in our value survey. So there's a bit of a misrepresentation of the gamer community here. And also, if we look further at the different consoles, for instance, so on PC, mobile, and on the console too, the percentage difference are very little. So men and women are considered almost equally among the population of gamers, and also among countries, the difference is not that big. At least not as big as our value survey portrays it to be. One of these, at least what we think the causation of this is that we primarily used Reddit as a form of distribution, and Reddit is often seen as a very most of the users of Reddit are basically male, and we also see that in this graph. This figure, it shows 74% of the users of Reddit are male. And if you're going to distribute your survey on a platform that's mainly used by male, you can expect that most of your respondents are going to be male. We try to fix this while we launched the survey. So after a couple of days, we tried to release the survey on several female or mainly social platforms that also were accessible to females or primarily by females. But as you can see, we still had a massive 85% male distribution of men in our survey, which was quite of a bummer for our representation. Now Omar is going to take over, and he's going to talk about more of the actual results we had from our value survey. So yeah, go ahead, Omar.
Thank you, Stefan. Well, as you can see, we already discussed the gender balance of the survey, but unfortunately we can't discuss all the results of the survey now because we have only limited time. But there's some more general things I would like to discuss with you. First of all, age. If you look at the age distribution of our survey, you can clearly see that the biggest part of our respondents are between the ages of 18 and 34, which is also, we think, down to the fact that we used Reddit for distribution. It's also a social media platform which is mainly used by younger people. You can also see there's some really old people, like 85 years or older. Those are most likely people who are just screwing around with the survey, and most probably not really people from 85 or older who are actually filling out our survey. But we can see here that there's a little bit more of a varied distribution of respondents. The same goes if we take a look at education. So we asked the people who filled out our survey what was their education, and then we asked their highest obtained degree. So if they're still enrolled, we asked their highest obtained degree. So for me, for example, I was still enrolled in my master's degree, so my highest obtained degree would have been a bachelor's degree. Well, here you can see that around 90% of all respondents had a high school degree or higher. However, it's quite clear that there's some kind of academic bias here. We called the survey an academic survey on Reddit. So we think there might be a little bit of a more academic feel to it. So there might be some people who didn't want to fill out the survey. As you can also see, there was an option not to say what your education was. Besides that, we also think that it might have to do with the names you use for certain types of education. For example, in the Netherlands, a bachelor degree can both be from a university or a University of Applied Sciences, HBO, even though there are different institutions with different things. So a university is more academic, whereas the Applied Sciences University is more practical. We still call them the same, which is probably also a cause of this different distribution. Now, if we take a look at the more historical questions of our survey, we can see that many of the respondents were interested in the past. Almost 90% of all the people were at least moderately interested in the past, which also is kind of self-evident when you post a survey on historical video games, that at least the majority of your respondents will be interested in the past in some way or another. And when we take a look at how often people played games set in the past, we can also see that this is the case for the majority of the people. They play video games set in the past for 2 or 3 times a week or more. Again, this is also quite logical if you take into account that we specifically targeted those people who play historical video games, and also distributed our survey on the platform in the subreddits who are like really about those historical video games. But when we take a look at historical inaccuracies, and especially if people were bothered by historical inaccuracies, we see a little bit of more interesting results. So we asked people if they were bothered by historical inaccuracies in video games, and here we can see again that the large majority, again, is bothered by historical inaccuracies. And we didn't really specify what we meant by historical inaccuracies. We just left it open for people to think of what they thought it was. And we can see that the majority, almost half of all respondents, said they were bothered a little. Yes, a little. And even so, it seems that people who play historical video games are somewhat bothered by the fact that there are inaccuracies in video games. Well, the people who answered yes to this question, we asked them, why are you bothered? What bothers you when you play a video game and when it's inaccurate? And this is what came up. We had multiple options. And I must add that people could pick more options than one. So that's why the numbers don't really add up if you count the numbers. But where you can see here that a lot of people were put off by the fact that the immersion is lost. So when they were playing a video game, which is historically inaccurate, they couldn't really immerse into the past anymore. We can also see that a lot of people think that it misrepresents history and that it's untruthful. They think that history should be truthful, and if a video game represents a history which is not truthful, it bothers them. Also, quite funny, a lot of people think or found that it also shows that designers don't really know what they're talking about, which is quite funny because most often historical video games do have a thorough background research, most often done by historians. But I want to zoom in on one little example here, which is the truthful, which is, I think, it really comes down to a question about history and what is history. I'm an historian, I'm a trained historian, so I know a little bit more of historical theory. And the consensus now, at least I was taught, is that there is no one history. There's no one history we can all agree on. History is something which you discuss, which you can have multiple viewpoints on. However, it seems that if the people who play this game don't really often grab that they think there should be one history, and when a video game presents this history different or other than they have been taught, then it's incorrect. However, if you look at schools and universities, we ask them, well, is this down to the fact that you learned something different in school? Most people don't tell that. So you can see that most of our players don't really get their history from schools or universities, but from other sources. We haven't really asked that. But you can see that there's like a little, it's kind of weird that they say, well, it's I'm bothered by inaccuracies, but also say, well, it's untruthful to history. Well, when we take a look at other points of our survey, we also asked people if they were prompted to do further research because of a video game. And here we can see again the majority of the people said yes. So the respondents really think that video games are a good way to further research into history. And when asked what sources they used, well, of course, Wikipedia and internet were the most abundant ones, which makes sense because that's the first thing you do when you want to know something. Then we can also see that, for example, documentaries and books are also quite popular. TV is a little less popular, and then study and conversation with other people and also archival research are really not that big. So we can really see that people do research more when they played video games, but then it's often on the internet, not like the classical historical research we know when you dive into an archive, which also makes sense because it's not the fun part, really. This is also a very cool question we asked. We asked people if video games change viewpoints on the past. And here we can see that the majority of the people agree with that. Which is also kind of weird because they also said that they were bothered by historical inaccuracies. So this is really, I'm not really sure what we have to do with these answers because it kind of clashes with each other. The one side they say, well, we're bothered by the fact that the game is historically inaccurate. But the other side they also say, well, my viewpoints are changed by video games. So it seems that maybe the questioning wasn't that good or people just didn't understand the question. But here I see quite a clash in numbers, which is kind of weird if you ask me. Well, as I already told, we didn't have that much time, so we're already at the overview of the survey. Just to recap everything I just said, and Stefan already said, we can see that the survey was filled out really good. We had over 1,600 replies. However, they were mainly males and mainly from people from between 18 and 34. However, the respondents really think that video games are a great tool to learn about the past and to prompt them to do further research about the past. They can even change viewpoints on the past. So we can see that video games are a great tool to experience the past. However, people are bothered by historical inaccuracies, or at least that's what we found in the survey. This is most often down to the misrepresentation of the past, or that the fact that people think that history is untruthful, or the history in the video game is untruthful. And I think that is also partly down to historical theory, the fact that you can agree upon one history. Well, furthermore, if we want to do further research in this, I think it's good to think about the question, how can you tackle the gender imbalance? We can see that like the 85% males we had is not representative for the entire gaming community. However, it's quite hard to like reach out to an entire community at once. So this is something when doing these kinds of research, you should really think about how can I reach all the people I want to reach, and also have them as a representative group of people. Well, I think that was everything we had to say. So we will now go to Discord to have a small discussion on this. Also, the dataset from this entire survey will be available from our website. I'm not really sure which one, but I'll probably say that in the Discord. Then, if you want to ask me or Stefan any questions, you can see our contact details here. And if you can also just send an email to Value, and we'll probably respond to it as well. So I'd like to thank you for your time. Thank you, Stefan. And that's it for today.